This week, we'll begin to think about applications of the work we've been doing in our class for congregational life. And this presentation will guide us through some reflections on spiritual development over the lifespan. We'll draw on biblical themes as well as themes of lifelong spiritual development from our classic sources in Christian spirituality, as well as some thoughts on more contemporary work in psychological development, thinking about young adulthood, middle adulthood, and elder life. One of the most significant scripture references for our work is from the story of Nicodemus encountering Jesus, reported in John 3. You must be born over again. The wind blows where it wills. You hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. So with everyone born from spirit. This story implies a dynamism in the Spirit of God blowing across the world, blowing across time, blowing across our lives, as well as a dynamism in our own human spirit. We are looking for the ways these spirits intersect with each other, where we might be changed from time to time, where we might be born over again, catch new winds of life. Or as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin has so well said, only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. I want us to think on the aim of Christian life as we start this process of thinking on our spiritual life over our lifespan. Many of us have been formed by the idea that Christian life is about the imitation of Christ. That is both in the life abundant, the life promised in its fullness, as well as in the capacity to suffer in Jesus' name, particularly in those areas of community suffering, those areas of supporting others in their pain. Perhaps this notion of the imitation of Christ is the primary model for forming our spiritual life each day. In Eastern Orthodoxy, there is a term hesychasm, which means inward and outward tranquility. It is dwelling in the peace that passes understanding. But this cannot happen unless we also couple it with a notion of shalom from Hebrew tradition, which is about right relationship, righteousness, being in such good relationship with all levels of humanity and circles of concern in our exterior world that we can indeed live moment to moment in the peace of Christ. Perhaps that is an aim that draws us and drives us in our Christian understanding. Theologically, there is the term sanctification, which is used in Wesleyan theology. It is used in the West, coming from the term sanctus, Latin for holy, growing in holiness, growing in completeness of our life with God. Or the Roman Catholic term divinization, to become one with the divine, or theosis from Eastern Orthodox tradition, as you are reading in the work of Kenneth Bachan, growing into union with God, into oneness with God. John Wesley made this very practical by inviting us to aim toward a perfection of love in this life, a sense of being in right relationship. He understood that this would never be a perfection of knowledge, that we would always make mistakes, but we could keep growing in the capacity to dwell with others in this loving spirit. In the 3rd century, the Greek philosopher Plotinus described the process of growth in spirituality over the lifespan. He described it as purification, illumination, and union. This became a very popular model for our early Christian forebears, and it was expanded in Evelyn Underhill's classic work Mysticism in 1911, in which she speaks of the awakening of the self, the purification or purgation of the self, illumination of the soul self, sometimes dark night of the soul, that doesn't always happen, and finally ending in the unitive life. This model fits amazingly well within the context of the Wesleyan understanding of grace. Prevenient grace surrounds us, it makes life possible. It is that presence of God before we have any awareness of how to identify with it. Justifying grace is like Underhill's statement of the awakening of the self, in which we become conscious of this grace and we choose it for ourselves. It is saving this life in Christ is for me, and I choose it. Sanctifying grace then spreads over the rest of our lifespan and may be seen as a kind of oscillation between purification and illumination. In fact, I've come to think of mature adult Christian spirituality as that kind of oscillation moment to moment, year to year in the seasons of our life. Sometimes there will be dark night experiences that come in upon us and make our faith very difficult, and time to kind of reorganize and rethink that which is most important. Finally, the notion of perfection of love is very much like the unitive life described by Evelyn Underhill, or as Plotinus describes it, union with God. Our human vocation is theosis, our deification as created beings into the image and likeness of God. This very high aim is described by Kenneth Bakken in The Soul's Journey into God. But we know it's very difficult to do this in all of our relationships, and I want to commend to you articles in our resources for this week from Ernest Boyer Jr. that describe a spirituality of the center and a spirituality of the edge. The center is our life in relationship, it's our life in our families, it's our life at work, it's our life in community and politics and social concerns, it's our life in the social aspects of the church. The spirituality of the edge is when we need to go away, go apart, go on retreat from time to time in order to recenter in God. This is the time of Sabbath. It's the time of perhaps even thinking of our small times each day of prayer as a going to the edge so that we can recenter in God to come back to our life in everyday circumstances with the many people and conditions and circumstances with which we interact. As we think about our Christian formation over the whole lifespan, we have many helps to do so, some from contemporary psychology. This slide shows more than I expect any of us to comprehend just in my reading and presentation here, but this is available to you in our course resources, and as you begin to think about a program in your congregation or in your ministry setting, you may want to reaccess this to look at it more carefully. It was just 50 years ago that Erik Erikson published Identity and the Life Cycle, and this gave us, in our popular culture, some ways of thinking about growth over the lifespan, changes that happen, themes and issues that emerge from childhood through elderhood. We also can see here the rough analogy of Evelyn Underhill's work in the classical Christian pathway of this extended period of purification and illumination during our adult years, as well as themes from Christian education, that there are different themes to be worked at in our Christian formation, whether in childhood, youth, young adulthood, midlife, retirement, and into our elder years. The fundamental model under which I hold all of this is actually a stage theory that Dante described in the 14th century. I discovered this model in Joseph Campbell's book, The Creative Mythology, in his 4-volume series, The Masks of God. And Dante's work goes like this. He describes youth as extending roughly from birth until our mid-20s, in which we are being educated in the ways of our society, our family, our culture. We are being equipped to live as adults in this world. And we are learning in the present generation the truth of this, that it does take until the mid to the late 20s for people to begin to really put together that first major jump into adult life with a vocation intact, perhaps with marriage intact, perhaps children, and beginning to live as full adults in their culture and community. Then we begin a very extended period that Dante called manhood. I like to expand that to speak of it as manhood, womanhood, or adulthood, stretching roughly from our mid-20s to our mid-40s. And for Dante, and for our work in Christian spiritual formation, there's a very unique description of what needs to happen in this time period. And that is both an outward piece of work as we continue to develop ourselves in our society, build our careers, care for our families, be good citizens in our communities. But there is also an inward task of awakening the interior life. This frequently happens in the mid-30s, after that first great movement into adulthood, when people begin to ask, well, is this all there is? Is this what I really want to accomplish with my life? Is a very important opportunity to turn to developing the interior aspects of life. And that guides us into what Dante called age, roughly from the mid-40s into the late 70s, or even beyond in our time, as average life expectancy continues to expand. In the period of age, we actually can make a very significant contribution to our society, particularly if we've done both the outward work and the inward work that Dante describes in the earlier period, that period from our mid-20s to our mid-40s. Teresa of Avila fits this model in an astonishingly direct way. It was at age of 47 that she began getting her vision to establish small communities of women, and she began her writing. So for those among our class who are in this age group, don't give up. Your time is just coming to actually make significant contributions to your church and to your community. That leads us to a word that people don't like to talk about these days, and yet those of us who have gone through this process with aging parents in their decline and death know that it's a very real circumstance, and that is the word decrepitude. Decrepitude for us is when either our physical or mental capacities begin to diminish in such a way that we are no longer able to contribute as fully as we once did in our society. Even there, Dante suggests that we can look back and bless our life, and we can look forward and deepen our prayer life so that we are ready for death. There may well come a time for many of us, no matter how stable things have seemed to be, that these words that come from Dante's Divine Comedy may speak very deeply to us. Midway this way of life we're bound upon, I woke to find myself in a dark wood where the right road was wholly lost and gone. Ay me, how hard to speak of it, that rude and rough and stubborn forest. The mere breath of memory stirs the old fear in the blood. It is so bitter, it goes nigh to death. Yet there I gained such good that to convey the tale I'll write what else I found therewith. How I got into it I cannot say, because I was so heavy and full of sleep when first I stumbled from the narrow way. Midway, this way of life we're bound upon. I woke to find myself in a dark wood where the right road was wholly lost and gone. Several of us in our course have come to that point of utter frustration, utter need to make major change, whether vocationally or relationally. Perhaps illness intervened in our life, and we were lost. These times of wilderness, which is the word we have from our classic Christian understanding, our scriptural understanding, are profound times to invite us to look again at our inner life, to see if we have adequate prayer resources to help us make the journey. Perhaps our faith itself has been the cause of getting lost, that we have lost the underpinnings of faith. So as we think on applications of spiritual formation ministries in the congregation, I want to think with you about times that are particularly ripe for us to be invited into this inner work. In the book Seasons of a Man's Life, published by Daniel Levinson in 1978, there is introduced a term, life structure. We all have a life structure at any given time of our existence. We cannot be alive without a life structure. A life structure describes our circumstances of our living arrangements, our home, literally, our apartment, our sense of economic stability, our sense of satisfaction in our work, our sense of satisfaction in our family life. We hope to advance within a stable life structure, that there's a period of stability that's adequate that helps us to move forward on all fronts. But we know sometimes there can be a serious failure or decline within the life structure. This may come about through illness. It may come about through the sudden death of a loved one. It may come about through a loss of a job. And we are suddenly catapulted into trying to figure out how to create a life structure again. Again, many of us in our class right now are experiencing a breaking out, trying for a new life structure or for a new sense of vocation. Breaking out initially is very exciting. It's a little terrifying as you think about trying to create new structures for your life or your vocation. And then we find it may be very challenging to actually put this new life together in the way you would like to do so. Some of us may experience periods that Levinson described as advancement, which itself produces a change in life structure. This would be, in the classic sense, one who has done frontline work in a factory setting and then is advanced to management. Or in our religious structures in the United Methodist Church, you have been a pastor, a very happy pastor, and you're advanced to a district superintendent. Or perhaps you have been in a setting of modest-sized congregations and you move into a larger congregation. That itself creates change. And finally, there are occasions when there is an unstable life structure, when either for economic reasons, for health reasons, for issues perhaps of struggle with addictions, one cannot quite find the necessary stability. A lot of us have been forced into some instability due to the current economic crises in our world, or to natural disaster kinds of crises. And there the deep need is simply to create stability again in one's life. At any of these junctures, again, notice when change is being invited, we can also be invited to think on the adequacy of our faith structure and how well our faith is supporting us, or whether it's a time to begin to explore new ways of prayer, new methods of prayer. We might even use Levinson's categories to think, has our faith life become a little too stable? Do we need to break out? In our class, we've all been discovering many different forms of prayer and begin to see the advantage from time to time of getting out even of a prayer rut and moving into some new ways of accessing our spiritual life. I'll bring us back to a slightly different version of this sense of life stage development. Again, this is available to you in our class resources for this week. And particularly to think with you about two terms that I want to be sure are in our vocabulary that are very critical in the history of Christian prayer, and that is cataphatic and apophatic. The word phatic element of this comes from a word meaning seeing or vision. So cataphatic means with image, and apophatic means without image. Teresa of Avila is a queen of the cataphatic path. You'll see in her writings many, many rich images in prayer. She often has profound visions and much interrelationship with Jesus. That is a cataphatic path. The apophatic path is without image. Our classic sources on that include Centering Prayer in the Cloud of Unknowing, John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart. This version of inner life prayer often is without many images, often without much in the way of landmarks along the way. Often there's even a sense of God's absence, and yet something is happening. Faith is being formed. In our time, the church at large has become very enamored with cataphatic paths, with our use of visual images in worship, our contemporary praise songs. And we need to understand that for some people, these do not speak very well to them. Instead, they are more of an apophatic pathway and really unable to relate to the kind of high visual images that many of us have in prayer. Each of these is its own pathway in its own right, and as we think about exploring and sharing different methods of prayer and different forms of life understanding within our congregations, we need to have some understanding of these two different pathways. The basic idea of the apophatic path is that if you can image it, it is not yet purely God. The apophatic path is guarding the transcendent element of God, that which we can never quite comprehend. The cataphatic path is guarding the intimate and inherently immanent nature of God. It is saying God is available to us in our own heart's understanding. So both are very, very important to the balance of Christian spirituality. As you prepare the assignment for this week of an outline of a spiritual formation ministry in your congregation or in your place of service, return to this theme of the various stages of life, issues, themes emerging over the lifespan. Think about work with children, with youth, with young adults, midlife adult persons, persons entering retirement, even those persons who are homebound, who are in our nursing homes. There's a powerful ministry that can be done by asking these folks intentionally to pray for the congregation. I have many wonderful stories about elders who indicated they really were praying for my ministry, and it means so much. So think about perhaps blending youth and elders. Think about the ways in which, as life progresses with changes in family life circumstances, as children develop and move on, there may be opportunities to recenter people into new configurations of group work. There are many resources as you work through this under our folder, including a diagram by Kent Ira Groff on application of spiritual formation ministries across the life of the congregation, including our administrative life. There's a sample of a ministry, kind of an ideal ministry that I've created. I hope you will think creatively and have a lot of fun thinking on this assignment as you would put this work together for your ministry in your place in this time. Listen for the Spirit. The wind blows where it wills. You do not know where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit.